Okay, there are some sheets of paper coming round slowly, table to table, each individually can have an A4 copy of the ladder of intergenerationality. So if you want to scribble on that, you can scribble to your heart's content, and you can take that away with you. The rest of the things I will leave back at the end. But that's for you. If you are at a table where you don't have any of those things, find a table where there's people. That would be fabulous. Okay, well, welcome. This is the workshop on intergenerational church. I am Suzi Farrant. I have come to you all the way from Scotland today. I didn't travel down this morning. I came down yesterday. But it's a delight. It is a real delight to be able to be here with you today to explore this area of intergenerational church. As we get going, let's first think about what do we mean by generation? If you've read any books with intergenerational written in the title, even my own, they broadly fall into two different camps. There's broadly two different ways of thinking about generations. The first is known as generational science. Okay? And that uses generation to refer to the historical period in which you were born. So maybe you've heard around the terms builders, baby boomers, Generation X, millennials, Generation Z, and the latest one, Generation Alpha. So that's all based on generational science. And in this approach, your generation is fixed. Because it's about when you were born, and you can't change when you were born, so in that stage you are fixed. Now you might be like me. I was born in 1981, and I'm one of these ones that doesn't seem to fit in a generation because the definitions change as to when Generation X finishes and when millennials start. So I'm what's known as a cusper. So one of the weird ones in the middle that's kind of got traits of both. So you might be a bit like me, or you might be, no, you're definitely a builder or a boomer or a Generation X or whatever. The second way of approaching generations, it uses the term generation to describe a group of people that are at the same life stage. So those at the same level on a family tree, if you like. Okay, so generations might include children, young people, young adults, working age adults, the retired, and so on. You see what I mean? In this way of thinking, the generation, your generation changes as you get older. You were a child, then you were a young person, and so on. Okay? So for me, I've moved child, young person, young adult, emerging adult, and now a working age adult. I'm not always going to be a working age adult now. Hopefully at some point I'll get to retire, and then we'll be older than that. So, two broadly different spectrums, both looking at generations in different ways. Now, for the purposes of us thinking about intergenerational church, so discipleship, worship, all of that stuff, across and between the different generations, different ages, it actually really doesn't matter which of those approaches we take. It really doesn't matter. What's significant about that first approach, that generational science approach, is that everybody born in a particular generation shares the same set of historical reference points. Builders, for example, all grew up with rationing, while millennials were the first generation to grow up with access to the internet. What's estate for new parents, etc., etc. So in both of these approaches, it's the shared experience that's the important thing. So, to try and keep things simple, we are going to define a generation simply as any group defined by age which shares the same set of cultural reference points, be they historical or current. Okay? That's the foundation. That's our shared understanding now. So, how do generations relate to one another in the church? I like to explore this as steps on a ladder. And this is where the picture of the ladder that you've got on your table is going to come in. If you can't see the screen well enough, you've got some images in front of you. So, if we're honest, most of our congregations have only one generation present. If you're anything like the Church of Scotland, which is my context, there's only one generation present, and I can imagine that you'll be able to pick which generation it actually is. But many, there's one generation present, and it tends to be the older, adult, the builder, and the boomer generations. This is what's known as mono-generational. In some senses, worship, discipleship, preaching can seem easy when there's only one generation present, as they all share the same set of cultural reference points and life experiences. But however, I think that we all realise that in a mono-generational congregation, something is missing. Now, by far the most common model adopted by the mainline church, certainly by the Church of Scotland, since the 1960s, has been an age-segregated approach. This is where discipleship, worship, pick any aspect of church life, is done differently by different generations. So many of you, I'm sure, will be familiar with the setup where adults are in the sanctuary, worshipping, while children are in the hall for a Sunday school. Perhaps the younger preschoolers are in another room in a creche. If you've got some teenagers, they might be off in another space, generally in the deep, dark depths of a basement that's really dark and damp. And then you might get some others elsewhere. Perhaps you might get age-specific opportunities, activities that also be available at other times. You might have something like a seniors' lunch, for example, or a youth fellowship happening at some point during the week. This has been our dominant model for over half a century. Brought in because we desired to follow educational developments, to offer the very best we could in Christian learning to our young people. But if we're honest, if we really dig down, we'll recognise that this model hasn't worked. We've perhaps all heard stories of the big Sunday schools and the 6 buses that it took to go on the annual beach picnic. But where are those people now they're older? The quality of the church's provision for children and young people has generally actually been of a really high standard. And yet, it's not led people to an adult life of discipleship. So from the research that Darren and I did in order opportunities for overlap between them. Even during those times of overlap, there are also often still activities determined by age, such as a children's address. The better our provision for children and young people has become, the further out the circle has moved, until there are simply no bridging points to keep a young person anchored in the life of a congregation, meaning that once they've outgrown the Sunday school or youth group, they're simply drifting away from church. Back in 2001, the Church of Scotland had a report. It was a Church Without Walls report. It was an amazing report. And in it stated that a church that can trace 40 years of declining youth statistics must ask if all the excellent youth work of 2 generations has been frozen out of church life because we have failed to build friendships across the generations. We've been caught in the mythology of the generation gap instead of being pioneering myth busters. So even back then, in 2001, they were calling on the church to determine to integrate children and young people into the life of the congregation. In other words, to move the Mickey Mouse ear inside the big circle of the congregation. Unfortunately, in my own denomination, the Church of Scotland, nothing has really hugely happened yet. I remain hopeful, but yet to happen. But there are several ways of moving this circle in, and each step takes us another step up the rung of the ladder. So, a simple step is to have all generations sharing the same space and providing for all of them. We do see this in the church, where different age-specific activities are offered for different generations within the same space. For example, a children's address within an otherwise adult-orientated service, or a play area, or a children's craft table within the sanctuary. These are multi-generational activities. So, multi-generations sharing a space, but engaging separately or differently. Okay? Another step up makes these experiences cross-generational, where not only is every generation catered for, but there is some crossover between the generations. For example, tea and coffee time after worship is often a cross-generational space, so one where all generations are present and can engage with one another. But note here that there isn't a shared discipleship activity within that. The mixing between the generations at that point is more accidental than intentional. Creating that intentional space of discipleship across all generations is the top of our ladder. It's intergenerational. Now, the inter bit of the word here is key. It involves interaction between those of different generations and is much more than all being in the same physical space. It means recognising that how people relate to God doesn't depend on our age. There are adults that love crafts, and there are children that are utterly bored by them. Shock horror. There are some adults who are bored by sermons, and some children that love listening to them. Recognising that we engage according to our preferences and style of spirituality, rather than by which age category we fall into, is foundational to being an intergenerational church. What else serving, sharing, or learning within the core activities of the church in order to live out being the body of Christ to each other and the greater community. Let's notice the parts of this definition that we've highlighted. Intergenerational church is intentional. It's more than happening to share the same space at the same time. There's a deliberate bringing together of the generations and an opportunity for interaction and relationship between them. Intergenerational church is mutual. It's the adults are not in charge. There's meaningful relationship between the generations, which recognises that each has something to give and to receive from the other. Now, for those of us in some form of ministry, this requires some degree of loosening our own grip on control and building up the gifts of others, regardless of age. Intergenerational church is within the core activities of the church. It's not a club, it's not an event, it's not a special ministry, it's not a special activity, it's not another thing to add to our already busy church schedules. It's an ethos that pervades through the very core of what it means to be church. And it involves our worship, our learning, our decision making, our mission, our outreach, our service, and so much more. The final part highlighted, intergenerational church is lived out. What we're addressing here is not just some nice theory or a policy statement to stick on our church websites. It has to be real. And it can only happen through the interaction and relationship, doing the ordinary things of church life each and every day of the week. We've used the image of a ladder as this is how congregations often progress to increased generational involvement. A mono-generational congregation might reach out to some younger people through age-segregated activities. An age-segregated congregation may begin to do more at the same time and in the same place, becoming multi-generational. A multi-generational congregation might offer some time for cross-generational interaction. And from all of these, a congregation can step up to being fully intergenerational, intentionally bringing the generations together in mutual service, sharing and learning within the core activities of the church in order to live out being the body of Christ together. We believe that this is how God intends the church to be. A family where all have a part, a place, a purpose. Intergenerationality is in the DNA of the church. Our recent practice of age segregating has actually been a form of genetically modifying the church. And including and involving all ages can begin to start to undo some of that. Let's get back to our original DNA. Now, if you came to this session hoping for a how-to guide to intergenerational church, then I'm afraid you're in for a wee bit of a disappointment. I think too often we jump straight to the how-to without understanding the far more important questions of why. And perhaps actually even more crucially, who? Who is Jesus Christ? Who are we? we are going to give you the opportunity to explore the who and the why by discussing together as you play a wee game. This game is designed to get you talking together about some of the practices that we feel can help you on the journey towards being an intergenerational church. Within the game, you've all got the question cards on your table, a big pack of them, and you'll notice that there are 5 different colours of cards. There's 5 different themes of questions. Okay, the red ones have got vision written on the front. Okay, and then there's more sets for each, 4 sets for each of those bits that we picked out of the definition. So there's questions on the theme of intentionality, some on mutuality, some on core, and some on lived out. Okay, within those, so within the theme of intentionality, you'll find questions about church community, humility, and hospitality. For mutuality, you'll find questions about place sharing, participation, and discipleship. For the core ones, there are questions about life together, joy, and worship. And for the lived out ones, there are questions about transformation, discernment, and testimony. Now for each theme, so each set of coloured cards, there are actually 3 different types of question, just to keep things interesting. Okay, so there are some would you rather questions. So it's simple, would you rather this or that? And it's a make a snap decision and explore what that is all about. There are some generations talk questions, so where you explore how you would answer this question if you were having a conversation with somebody of a different generation to you. And then there are some deep discussion questions, okay, and they can go deep. If you want to go deep, they'll allow you to go deep. So as you can see from the picture on the screen, there is an amazing little game board to use for this game. But unfortunately my brain was in a bit of a brain fog yesterday when I was packing everything for the stall and the workshop and everything, and I kind of left them at home. They're sitting on my kitchen table in a nice little packet, and because I live in Scotland, when I realised at 9 o'clock this morning that I didn't have them, there was no way I was going to be able to go back to get them, I'm afraid. So we're improvising, which is always a really good thing to be able to do. So I have given you a dice. So instead of rolling a dice and moving a counter around the game board, what you're going to do is you're going to roll the dice, and if you roll a 1, you're going to pick up a vision question. If you roll a 2, you're going to pick up an intentionality question. If you roll a 3, you can pick up a mutuality question. If you roll a 4, you can pick up a core question. If you pick up a 5, you can pick up a lived out question. And if you're lucky enough to roll a 6, you can choose which type of question it is that you want. Okay, so we've got most of the rest of this session to have a look and to play this game and to see what discussions come out. So the idea is you pick it up, you read the card, you answer it, and then have a discussion around your table. Okay, so it's not just you answering the question, but answer the question together and see if people of different generations around the table have different answers, or see if people have got different perspectives, see what goes on with all of that. And then at lunchtime, if you want to come and visit me on the Intergenerate UK stand, there is a QR code on there that you can follow that will get you the game. So you can then download it for yourself and play it at home and print it out and all of that kind of stuff. So you will be able to see the game board. It's just there. And this game is all based off the book that I've written with my colleague Darren Phillip. That is also available on the stand should you wish for it later. A lovely 25% off for you, special today. So it's only £12.75 if you want that. But for now, play the game, enjoy, and I'll come around. And if you want me to come and have a discussion with your table or whatever, then just wave at me. But enjoy. Okay? Okay, I know you're all deep in the conversation, which on one level is amazing, but on another level it's nearly lunchtime. So we're going to need to slowly wrap this all up. get leadership teams together with children and young people and all the rest of it together to just use it to explore what is church, what's God designed church to be, who should we be together. So as I say, there's a QR code on the Intergenerational UK store, so if you'd like to follow that, you can download the game for yourself. It comes in a couple of different sizes, so those question cards are for the size of an A2 game board, but there is an A3 version and what have you, so you can be printing the discussion cards on your normal A4 printer and all of that stuff. So it is there, and as you see, it can even work without the actual board. You can work just using the discussion questions and a dice. It's a shame. I've got one that's we have little meeples to use as counters, and that's quite fun. I actually have a giant version, like the Twister mats. I've got one like that, but again, I couldn't really bring it on the train, unfortunately. But there we go. So that game is based on the book. As I say, there are some copies of the book. It would be great if I didn't have to carry them home again. So it is available for you at £12.75, which is 25% off for today only. The publishers rarely offer discounts, so if you're wanting, I do that. In the book, we have an epilogue, and the epilogue leads us through just 3 different things. It talks about how we need to behold God, to behold who God is. That's the starting point for this journey to being intergenerational churches. We need to behold God, to recognise that being an intergenerational church is less about us and more about God. Okay, so that's behold. Then we talk about the need to be held. So to be held by God. When stuff is tough, when we're trying to make changes and it feels like all we're doing is batting our heads against brick walls or certain people or whatever it may be, that we need to recognise that we are held by God in all that we are doing. And then the final word is that we need to be bold. So from that place of beholding who God is, of being held by God, we then can have the confidence to go and be bold and shift and change and develop everything that is going on. So just to finish our session this morning, I have got a closing prayer / blessing / whatever you like, we'll use whatever language, that I'd really like to pray for all of you as you go about trying to become an intergenerational church. So it's based on those 3 things of beholding, being held, and being bold. So let's pray. God, we recognise that being an intergenerational church is less about us and more about you. Moses saw God through a burning bush, saw what God could do, saw that God was more than he could ever imagine. As we prepare to become a more intergenerational church, may we too learn to behold God, to see what God can do, to see that God is more than we can ever imagine, and to see all the possibilities. God, we know that entering into a new story of church David boldly threw off that which people regarded as safe. Mary boldly accepted God's call on her life. Peter boldly stepped out of a place of safety and into the unknown. In becoming a more intergenerational church, God, may we act with that same boldness, knowing that we are held by you, the God whom we behold. And so now to God who is able to do immeasurably more than we can ask or imagine, according to God's power at work within us, be glory in the church and in Christ Jesus throughout all generations, forever and ever. Amen. Thank you. I'm going to be over there on the Intergenerate UK stand for the whole of lunch. If you do want to come and speak to me, please do. I will be here. I will be leaving really bang on the dot at 4 o'clock because I've got a train to catch. But other than that, come and speak to me. That would be amazing.